The Bible gives us the exact date of the Exodus, and guess what? Archaeology confirms this fact. My friend, this is a great book. It's accurate, can change your life. Follow us as we move through Egypt again. The greatest miracle of antiquity took place when God led His 2 million redeemed slaves through the waters of the Red Sea. According to the chronology of 1 Kings 6 verse 1, this event took place in 1450 BC. The Bible also gives us the exact date when the Israelites celebrated their first Passover. It was on the 14th day of Abib, later called Nisan, which corresponds with our month of March. 3 days later they passed through the Red Sea. This brings us to March 17, 1450 BC. When the cruel Thutmose III and his mighty officials realized that they had lost their slaves, they pursued them, but listen to what happened. Exodus 14:26 says, "Then the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand over the sea, so that the waters may flow back over the Egyptians and their chariots and horsemen. Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and at daybreak the sea went back to its place. The Egyptians were fleeing towards it, and the Lord swept them into the sea. The water flowed back and covered the chariots and horsemen, the entire army of Pharaoh that had followed the Israelites into the sea. Not one of them survived." The story of the Exodus is not recorded in Egyptian annals. Why? Because they never reported any defeat. But fortunately, archaeologists identified a pharaoh who died on the exact date, March 17, 1450 BC. Let me read you the obituary of Thutmose III written by Amenemhat, which was recently discovered. "Lo, the king completed his lifetime of many years, splendid in valor, in might and triumph, from year 1 to 54. The last day of the 3rd month of the 2nd season, he mounted to heaven, he joined the sun, the divine limbs mingled with him who begat him." Breasted, the great Egyptologist, converted the Egyptian date to our Gregorian calendar, and guess what? Thutmose III died on the 17th of March, 1450 BC. It corresponds perfectly with the biblical date for the Exodus and the death of the Pharaoh and his army. The story of the Exodus, my friend, is not a myth. It's an historical fact. The Exodus is a symbol of God's mighty power to deliver people from any kind of slavery. And just remember, the God who lived in Moses' day is still the same today. He longs to deliver us from any kind of slavery. The humiliating death of the greatest Pharaoh who ever lived was such an embarrassment to the Egyptians that they decided to conceal the scandal forever. They mummified and buried a man in this tomb that resembled the great king. And for more than 3,000 years, they fooled the scholars concerning the biblical truth about the death of their great Pharaoh. But in 1973, Harrison Weeks did some X-rays on the supposed mummy of Thutmose III and discovered it was the remains of a young man who died in his early 40s. The real king was much older because he ruled for 54 years. When I visited the burial place of Thutmose III, I was again convinced of the authenticity of the Bible. It is still the most reliable source of truth in circulation. But more than that, I have also discovered that the Bible is an inspired manuscript that can touch the lives of its readers in a very meaningful way if studied prayerfully. While I looked at the Egyptian gods in the tomb of Thutmose III, I thought of the comfort that the Bible brings for the comfortless, the hope that it brings for those who feel hopeless, and for those who feel lost and overcome by feelings of guilt. It tells of a forgiving Savior. You cannot afford to miss the next presentation in this series. You are going to meet the son of Thutmose III. I visited his tomb in the Valley of the Kings and want to share his reactions with you concerning the loss of all the Hebrew slaves. We're also going to see how to cope with bitterness. Has somebody caused you some bitterness in life? How do you cope with it? In our next presentation, you will see the devastating effects of bitterness in somebody's life. Please don't miss it. And may God bless you as you follow the story of Moses.